Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending where you are in the world. But either way, happy Wednesday. We're halfway through the week with Building Compassionate Practices Through a Functional Behavior Analytic Lens by Hannah Kaplan-Reimer. So thank you so much, Hannah, for doing this with us today. Um, Now, during the next 2 hours, you're going to have the chance to earn 2 ethics CEUs. And the way that you're going to earn those CEUs is by staying the entire duration of the webinar and also by answering poll questions that are going to be popping up on your screen. You should have joined with a button that says join webinar that was emailed to you. If you called in on your cell phone, then please keep in mind that you will also need to go to that email and join with that button. So this way you get credit if you need CEU. If you're dialed in audio only and you don't see anything, then GoToWebinar cannot record your attendance and we will not have any record of you being here. So if you need a general certificate of attendance or CEU certificate, then we will not be able to provide you with one because we will have no record of you being here. So we can't generate a certificate for you in any way. Alrighty, so please make sure that you are logged in properly. Now, if you have any difficulty at all, you can oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what that sentence was. If you have any difficulty with either calling in or joining by the computer, then you can do both at the same time and have them simultaneous anyways. Alrighty, if you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and throw them in the questions box. There are no handouts as of yet, but you will be able to download them as the presentation goes on. So just keep that in mind. All right, I think that's all I have to say for now. If I notice anything else, I will chime in, but otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah.
Hey, thank you. My name is Hannah Kaplan-Reimer, and I will be presenting on building compassionate practices through a functional behavior analytic lens. I am a board-certified behavior analyst, and my background is primarily in teaching and consulting in applied behavior and analytics settings. I'm also the parent of 2 children who have traits of neuromagnificence. Thank you to Chris Fraser for that term. And they are a continual motivation for me to understand how to effectively bring compassion into our world. I'm a member of the Louisiana Contextual Science Research Group, and under the guidance of Dr. Emily Sandos, who is a clinical behavior analyst and a BCBA. And much of this work was done in collaboration with Dr. Emily Sandos with input from Megan Duffy-Casella and Dr. Troy DeFried. So I'd like to hear a little bit from you to see what your background is. So if you want to go ahead and pull up poll 1, Marissa.
Alrighty, everybody. Go ahead and tell me about your background and interest. And a blue box should have popped up on your screen and you should be able to select an answer and submit it with the submit button. If you have any trouble with this interface at all, the button doesn't work, you can't see it, didn't pop up for you, go ahead and write your answers in either a Word doc or the body of an email and you can send them to me after the webinar for your participation. If you need CEUs, please make sure that you participate in these polls, otherwise you will not qualify for CEUs. If you only need a general certificate of attendance, that's completely free and will automatically come at the end. You don't need to participate in the polls in order to get it, you just need to come here. Alrighty, but thanks for participating. Let's shut this down. And it looks like 59% say I'm a clinical behavior analyst or therapist. 24% say I work primarily in an ABA setting and I'm curious about CBA. Nobody works primarily in an ABA setting is not curious about CBA, and 17% say other.
Okay, well, I'm surprised at how many clinical behavior analysts there are and was not expecting that. So I might need to modify things a little bit. But all right, let's go ahead. But that's good. It puts us in a good position for understanding this. So Throughout this workshop, we're going to be doing some experiential work. Please make sure to resource yourself. If you need to go to the bathroom, get a drink, do so. We might touch on some thoughts, feelings, and sensations that are a little difficult. So I encourage you to only take a practice as far as you feel comfortable. And know that you can opt out of any guided practice. And if you miss some of the information, you can always email me. I also want to mention that because my background is from more of a radical behavior analytic lens, it has been a real journey for me to learn a lot of new terminology and really a fundamentally different way of speaking about behavior from a contextual and somewhat interbehavioral perspective. I just wanted to name that because there are parts of presenting this material that are kind of scary for me, and I might stumble on some words and concepts, but this may be new for some of you as well, so I'm happy to model being willing to mess up in the name of valued living. I'm also going to be shamelessly using pictures of my children because I have consent and because images of them help me get in contact with the contingencies that I will be talking about today on a real tangible level. I'm also going to be using some photographs that I've taken, as well as some that my 8-year-old has taken. He may struggle with reading and regulation at times, and he has an incredible eye. So I chose to incorporate these photos because it was fun for me to prepare, and I wanted to add some appetitives or positive reinforcers to my context that is prone to being dominated by anxiety during presentations. In other words, I'm engaging in a bit of self-compassion, and I'm hoping that if I create an open, flexible context for myself, because from an interbehavioral perspective, our contexts are inextricably linked, this will contribute to a more engaging context for you as well. So, when I was about to become a parent, I thought, I got this. I'm a behavior analyst. I've been working with kids for a really long time, and I can manage their behavior. I envisioned this blissful experience where I could shape and mold them to be the perfect little human beings that I wanted them to be. And sometimes it is blissful. But, you know, there's reality. And all of those little moments that are woven together that create an entire context. And we all have these moments. Moments that when seen together, moved around, shifted, zoomed out. They might look a little different. And sometimes these moments can be hard. Sometimes really, really hard. As it turns out, my traditional behavior analytic background did not perhaps entirely prepare me for all of these hard moments, though I have had many incredible discussions with behavior analysts about similar woes. I might even venture to say that given my particular history, I had many, many rules that perhaps even made it harder to parent these spicy and incredible kids. In fact, I've spent the last decade trying to learn a whole new set of skills that sometimes feel at odds with the skills that I was really fluent in, though my mission remains to integrate all of it. And given my own tendency toward fretting and being hard on myself, compassionate practices in particular have been a focus of mine. My original exposure was through the Stanford Compassion Training Program, and then through Dr. Dennis Tersch and Dr. Laura Silberstein-Tersch's work on integrating Dr. Paul Gilbert's compassion-focused therapy and mind training into ACT, into acceptance commitment therapy. Despite having ventured outside the field, I continue to feel a pull toward the behavior analytic community, partially because of beautiful people like you all here, even though I can't see your faces, are working tirelessly to keep behavior analysis relevant and to use its core premises to make this world a better one. And because we work and engage with individuals who are all unique and respond differently within different contexts. Also, because behavior analysis is actionable, because behavior analysts observe and intervene based on analysis. And I know that I'm not the only one who has those really, really hard moments, and that they happen in all different contexts, including within behavior analysis. They show up for parents that you work with, clients that you work with. And I'm going to make the assumption that because you're all human beings and you care deeply about other human beings, that you also have really, really hard moments in relation to yourself and others. So I hope that I can share with you a behavior analytic perspective and how compassion can contribute toward resourcing some of those harder moments. And specifically, I will share an analysis based on functional relations. First, briefly, from beyond the behavior analytic world, there are some definitions that have surfaced. One from the Merriam-Webster dictionary says that compassion is a sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. Paul Gilbert says that compassion is a sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a commitment to try to relieve and prevent it. So I know that we just started, and this is a little strange maybe, but I'd like to offer you 3 to 5 minutes to do anything that you want to do right now. Anything that would help you feel ready to tune into this conversation. Could be that you close the tabs on your computer, you get yourself a cup of tea, a blanket, maybe you do some breathing, or maybe you just want to stay put and hang out. I'll also ask you to grab a pen and paper for later. So just take a moment to think about what would feel resourcing to you. And let's get back. My time is 1:13, so let's say 1:17. Way back. So, it just changed to 1:14. How about 1:18? 1:18. So 4 minutes from now. So I'll see you in 4 minutes. Thing. If you're willing, think about a moment or a situation that you. Okay. That may have been a little strange. That felt kind of weird for me. But I hope it was a little bit resourcing. I'd like you, can we pull up poll number 2, Marissa?
Alrighty, everybody.
Just to get a
So
couple.
how did that, oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
Alrighty, had that mini break land for you. Take some time to answer this. Awesome. Thanks for voting, everybody. I'll shut this down in just a second. Okay. Looks like 65% say good, 1% said bad, 14 said a mix, and 19% said meh.
Okay. Thank you for your honesty too. um, so I imagine that this could have functioned differently for each person here. Maybe for some, it was a nice opportunity to do something that was nagging you. For some, maybe it felt uncomfortable. My guess is that you all did not do the same exact thing in those few minutes. The topographies were all probably quite different. I'm hoping that for some, whatever you did functioned a little bit to create more space to be present, but also may have felt really uncomfortable. We're not used to taking breaks, especially at the start of a workshop. And for some, the context that my instructions contribute to and the behaviors that you engaged in may have facilitated a rigid, narrow context. And for others, it may have facilitated a broad, flexible context. For others, maybe a mix. And for some, just a eh. Um, so over the course of this presentation, I'll be referring frequently to these two different ways of relating to one's environment, two different functional relations. We can think of functional relations as somewhat linear manner in terms of contingencies, antecedents, behaviors, consequences, or MOs. We can also zoom out a bit and consider functional relations as a dynamic, ongoing, bidirectional relationship between your behavior and the context in which you are behaving. The function of any behavior would be the context in which the behavior occurs, and the function of any context would be the behaviors that occur. And we can categorize those molar functional relations into appetitive and aversive. With appetitive functional relations, we see a broadening of repertoires, ease of access to reinforcers, a freedom to make choices, exploratory behavior, curiosity, maybe some playfulness. Physically, this doesn't have to be large, gross motor exploration. There could even be a lot of varied creative behavior while sitting and thinking. ACT folks might call this psychological flexibility. And I'll borrow Dr. Sandos's equivalents to moments of thriving. Some of the behavior that we engage in moments of appetitive functional relations is in the form of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. You might feel your shoulders relax or your chest open up. You might feel a sense of ease. You might feel exhilarated, safe, inspired, loving. You might think, yes, all is good. Things will be okay. And if you're at work, maybe you think, oh, this is why I chose to do this. So for a moment, think about a moment or situation that you might categorize as being predominantly appetitive. If you'd like, you can close your eyes. Think about a moment that you'd say you were feeling that you were thriving. Maybe you find yourself at ease, where you are content, free, safe, maybe other feelings that I've not named but resonate with you. And as you're thinking about that, think, what is your immediate context? Where are you? Are you in nature? Are you at home? Are you with other people or are you alone? Maybe with a pet? What do you see? What do you hear? And what do you smell, maybe? And if you can, notice any thoughts, feelings, or sensations that arise for you. And what do you see yourself doing in this context? Okay, if you can return now, if your eyes were closed, you can open them. And we're going to pivot now to the flip side of appetitive, which we would call aversive. Under such functional relations, we would see instead the narrowing of repertoires, a run, fight, hide type of behavior, and limited access to reinforcement, rigidity, inflexibility. In other words, suffering. In moments of aversive functional relations, you might feel your heart racing, you might sense your jaw clenching or a shallow breath, you might feel scared, angry, impulsive, you might think, ew, or get me out of here, or why does that person always do that really annoying thing? If you're willing, think about a moment or a situation that you could categorize as being dominated by aversives, but take it easy on yourself and consider choosing a moment that is not greatly evocative. So take a moment to think about a situation. If it helps, you can close your eyes. Think about a situation in which you feel a bit uncomfortable. Feel at ease, tight, stuck, frustrated, nervous. Maybe other feelings that I have not named but resonate with you. What's the immediate context? Where are you? Maybe you're at work, maybe you're driving. Are you inside, outside, in a city? Are you with other people or alone? What do you see? What do you hear? And what thoughts, feelings, and sensations might be arising for you? What do you see yourself doing in relation to your environment? And when you're ready, return, open your eyes if they were closed. I'm now going to ask you to take out a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. I'm going to show you pictures and a couple of really quick video clips. For each one, if you can observe any thoughts, feelings, or sensations that come up for you while you're checking it out. So think about what tone it sets. Does it pull for wanting to run, fight, hide? Does it pull for you wanting to play, explore, engage? What functional relations might your behavior be under as you look at these images? Can you characterize it as aversive, appetitive, both, in between? And know, of course, that these are just moments or snapshots of the context that your behavior is in relation with. So you, of course, have your history, you have the food you ate for lunch and how it might be sitting with you, how much you slept last night, what news you read this morning. So what these images elicit for you now may be different than what they would have elicited from you yesterday, or what they might elicit from you next week. And let's go ahead and start with the first image. If you can jot down a couple of things. What, if any, thoughts, feelings, or sensations arise as you look at this image? Any sensations in your body? Any memories come up? Any emotions? Does it pull for you wanting to run, fight, hide? Does it pull for you wanting to play, explore, engage? What functional relations might your behavior be under as you look at this image? And can you characterize it as aversive, appetitive, both, or in between? And if we could pull up poll number 3, that would be great.
Alrighty, everybody. So how would you characterize the functional relations? And go ahead, take some time to answer this. Awesome. Alrighty. I will shut this down in just a second. Perfect. It looks like 4% say predominantly aversive, 58% say predominantly appetitive, 29% say a mix of both, and 9% say I had a hard time tuning into my experience.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it can be hard just to kind of drop into these experiences. So I appreciate your willingness to try. And let's see if this one evokes anything or elicits anything. Oops. So what thoughts, feelings, and sensations arise when you look at this? Do you feel like running away? Or do you want to start cleaning? Do you want to pull up a chair and chill out in this kitchen? Any sensations in your body? Any thoughts, memories, emotions? What functional relations might your behavior be under as you look at this image? And let's pull up poll number 4.
All right, everybody. Go ahead and answer this one now. Awesome. Thank you so much for voting. All right. Looks like 88% say predominantly aversive, 2% say predominantly appetitive, 5% say a mix of both, and 5% say that they had a hard time.
Very interested in those who said that is a predominantly appetitive. Great. Okay. So I know from real life experience that our dear guinea pigs evoke different responses from different people. So this one I know can go really either way. Again, let's tune into your experience here. And let's pull up poll number 5.
All righty, everybody. Go ahead. All righty. Let's shut this one down too. it looks like 13% say predominantly aversive, 41% say predominantly appetitive, 37% say a mix of both, and 9% say that they had a hard time tuning in.
Okay. Real life reactions. Honesty. Good. Some people see guinea pigs as rodents and others see them as cuddly little creatures. All right, this next one elicits very tangible thoughts, feelings, and sensations for me. So let's see if it does for you. Oh, yeah, that makes me so uncomfortable. I really need to take some deep breaths after that one. I'd love to hear from you in poll number 6.
Alrighty, everybody, go ahead. Alrighty, thank you all for voting. Let's shut this down. And it looks like 78% say predominantly aversive, 3% say predominantly appetitive, 18% say a mix of both, and only 1% had a hard time tuning in.
Yeah, that one's visceral. So it's so interesting seeing different responses from people. Really thought this was going to be 100% aversive. All right, how about this next one? Okay. Poll number 7.
Alrighty, everybody. Go ahead and take some time. Awesome. Thank you all. That was quick. Let's see. 10% say predominantly aversive, 59% say predominantly appetitive, 28% say a mix of both, and 3% say that they had a hard time tuning in.
Great. Thank you all for participating in that. I would love for you to share in the questions box what kind of things came up for you in general. Did you have any thoughts, feelings, and sensations that stood out for you overall? Did you notice a change with each? Were you surprised by any of your responses? Did you have any urges to do anything? So please, I would love for either to raise your hand and speak out loud, or write in the questions box. Give you a couple minutes for that.
Alrighty, so it looks like we are getting... Thank you all for participating. Alrighty. My responses were predictive and I was able to take time to think about how I feel. I immediately sighed at the sight of the kitchen. It was exhausting just looking at it. All right. I noticed the images elicited strong emotional reflexes for me. I noticed a change in heart rate between pictures. I love the sound of cities, but not as comfortable when cars didn't move out of the way of the police car. Yeah, so that's about the general.
Great, thank you. Um, I thought it was really interesting in the polls that it seemed like people were able to tune in better when the images were more aversive, I think, overall. And I think that speaks to our human nature, that it is easier generally to tune into those aversives, and it takes practice and effort sometimes to ease into that more appetitive space and to notice those. So that was really interesting for me to see. Okay, so now that we've done a little bit of discrimination training on aversives and appetitives, we're going to bring this with us in our understanding of compassion from behavioral contextual lens. So in 2018, Taylor, Nosek, and LeBlanc put out a paper highlighting our relative lag in this area, as well as the dire need to incorporate compassionate care into practice. In 2020, the BACB made the addition of treating others with compassion as one of the core foundational principles that behavior analysts use to interpret and apply the standards in the code. And we are tasked with incorporating that into our practice still. In the last couple of years, a number of books have been published, including Jacob and Michelle's. I don't know if they're here, but I urge you to check out their book. And many papers have come out pointing to the importance of exploring compassion from a behavior analytic perspective, using compassion toward creating behavior analytic change within the field of behavior analysis and well beyond, including many social justice issues. Along with Dr. Sandos and a bunch of very cool, experienced behavior analysts in the field, we've been working on a special issue on compassion in behavior analysis and practice. And here is a link. Oh, is this? Oh, there we go. Here is a link to a list of papers that have published so far, and please look out for a whole bunch more that are coming out. These are really fantastic, fantastic papers. So when it comes to conceptualizing compassion from a behavior analytic perspective in the literature, some of the concepts are centered around topographical responses. So for example, suggestions include asking clients how they're feeling, or making sure to keep your arms uncrossed while speaking to parents. And others are more tied to functions, such as looking at reinforcement contingencies supporting compassion. Dr. Sandos, Megan Duffy-Casella, and Dr. Troy DeFreen and I looked at this work and found some commonalities amongst the functional approaches. When I describe these concepts, you'll hear that I talk about the provider of compassion and the recipient of compassion. The provider, meaning the one who's engaging in the compassionate behavior, and the recipient, the one who the provider is engaging in compassionate behavior toward. So I'm going to go through these components. First, compassion is behavior. So compassion can be understood as behavior or a pattern of activity of an organism. It's something that we can actively engage in. We can learn to engage in compassion. We can consider from which context it emerges, the contingencies at play, and we can directly train compassion, arranging these variables. Compassionate describes a way a person can respond to the world. They can behave compassionately. And because the topography of compassionate behavior varies across different contexts, we can conceptualize it as a functional response class. Second, compassion is sensitive to interlocking behavioral contingencies, or IBCs. There's a bidirectional relationship within compassion. Within a dyad, each creates a context for the emergence and maintenance of another person's behavior, and each behavior becomes a part of the other's context. The provider of compassion and the recipient of compassion are engaging in a dynamic, functionally related behavioral stream. You can imagine two friends together. One has just gotten bad news about a loved one, and they tell their friend. That would not be the same as one person talking to a wall, hopefully, unless they really relate to walls well. The friend would have a reaction, even if a really subtle one. And the person in distress would respond to that reaction, and so on. And it's not like a game of ping pong. There's a steady stream of responses and contextual changes interacting with one another. In the case of self-compassion, the individual is both the provider and the recipient of compassion. And the functional relations are really not all that different from compassion for other. But with self-compassion, the stimulus products of a person's behavior can create the context for emergence and maintenance of their own future behaviors. So past Hannah, has worked on breathing in many different contexts and has listened to many guided practices that facilitate an appetitive context, although it is an ongoing practice and I'm still working on it. When future me accidentally locks her keys in the car, she may have access to those skills, maybe, hopefully. She may take some deep breaths, recall a word or image that resonates with the moment, and create a little more room to engage in other flexible behaviors. If it's a nice day, maybe she will use the opportunity to go for a walk. Maybe she has work to do and she'll ask a friend if she can sit in their living room for a bit with her computer. Third, compassion is sensitive to antecedents and aversive functional relations in the recipient. Antecedents of aversive functional relations. So antecedents for engaging in compassionate behavior, remote and/or immediate, include a potential recipient, which is either oneself, if it's in the case of self-compassion, or another, in a context that is functioning at least in part aversively. So in other words, the compassion provider is attuned to the suffering of another or oneself. So if I'm interacting, let's say, with a parent of a client, maybe we're talking about the progress that their child is making, and I notice that they do not seem very excited about their child's progress. Maybe I can see their face become flush. Maybe you can even see their eyes tear up. Those aversive functional relations would function as antecedents for my compassionate behavior if I've had exposure to compassionate behavior in similar contexts. And number 4, compassion is sensitive to consequences of recipients' behavior change. So compassion is not only sensitive to antecedents, the suffering, compassion is also sensitive to the consequences, which is in the recipient's behavior change. So it's not as though when we're engaging in compassionate behavior, someone comes up to us and hands us a cookie for our good deeds. It's in the recipient's response that compassion is consequated. That being said, it's not necessary for the compassionate behavior to be consequated with each interaction, as long as the broader contingencies support it, just like any behavior does not need to be reinforced continuously to be maintained. And the consequences might be subtle, but the more we engage in compassion, the better we get at detecting those subtleties. The consequences may also not be immediate or direct from the behavior of the recipient, but instead might be functionally related contexts. So this point also distinguishes compassion from empathy and perspective taking, in that it's specifically characterized by its sensitivity to the consequences of the recipient's behavior change, whereas empathy and perspective taking do not. It also partially distinguishes compassion from any good deed. So for example, a kindergarten class may have a sticker chart, which involves earning points for being kind to friends. It's good to be kind to friends, and maybe a system like that could help children to become more fluent in kindness behaviors, maybe even exposing them to natural contingencies. But as we conceptualize compassion, there would also be some recognition of how the recipient responds to these acts of kindness. And number 5, compassion shifts functional relations from aversive to appetitive in the recipient. Behavior is compassionate specifically when it alleviates suffering for the recipient. Of course, one way suffering can be alleviated is through the removal of aversive contexts. Assuming that there's some history of appetitive learning and appetitives are present, removing aversives can allow for other, more appetitive functional relations to emerge. But we can't or don't want to necessarily do that. If you consider a child who has a hankering for sugar, for example, though giving them a chocolate bar when they're having a meltdown may provide some relief for both the child and the caretaker, it will likely not broaden their context over time. It might be compassionate to give them sweets in some circumstances, but if there is no effort to increase flexibility beyond that, then the context around tasty sugary treats might become narrower over time. So another route toward alleviating suffering is via transformation of the function of those aversive contexts. And here we can make a distinction between pain and suffering, where pain can function in many ways, while suffering is by definition specifically aversive. So contexts that have been a source of suffering may continue to be painful while no longer evoking suffering. Compassion fosters such a change, where the aversive functional relations or the suffering of the recipient shift toward appetitive functional relations, toward more thriving. This way, in the presence of contexts that have functioned aversively, we can see appetitives emerge and the function of aversive contexts themselves change. Number 6, the aversive to appetitive shift functions appetitively for the provider of compassion. Suffering of self and others is often painful and naturally aversive. We're suggesting, though, that compassion is maintained by positive reinforcement. For most people, seeing or experiencing suffering is aversive, and it's natural for people to want to reduce this suffering. It's also most easily done in the short term via negative reinforcement, removing the source of pain, for example. If the focus is maintained on simply reducing suffering and not encouraging appetitive functional relations, responses to suffering of the self or other are likely to be narrow, rigid, and insensitive to how those responses are functioning for others. And this will likely lead to continued avoidance of pain. Learning compassion, though, involves the compassion provider contacting positive reinforcement or appetitive consequences when another's behavior shifts from being dominated by aversive functional relations toward appetitive functional relations. In other words, learning compassion involves going beyond seeking relief from contacting another's suffering to approaching the opportunity to liberate another from their suffering, even when we can't resolve their pain. So we would see then that compassion being under appetitive functional relations for the provider, it might be characterized by breadth, flexibility, and simultaneously sensitivity to the changing needs of the recipient and other aspects of context. And lastly, a compassion repertoire can emerge as a generalized operant. Though all suffering involves aversive functional relations, each instance is unique and has different topographies and circumstances from which they emerge. So each instance of contact with aversive antecedents for the self or another provides an opportunity for learning to engage in compassionate behavior. Each time one engages in compassionate behavior, it increases the likelihood of stimulus and response generalization. So one would be more likely to engage in a broader range of topographical behaviors under a broader range of aversive antecedents, likely involving the emergence of a robust, flexible, and generalized compassion repertoire, accessible also in novel circumstances. And if a person is in tune with antecedents of their own suffering, as well as consequences of compassion towards themselves, this can help account for development of self-compassion repertoire. Also, appetitive learning is cumulative. So the more interaction with appetitive contexts evoke more appetitive behaviors and sensitivity to positive reinforcers. More appetitive behaviors create more appetitive contexts, and so on. So because compassionate interactions are under appetitive functional relations, we would see each instance of compassionate interaction increase the availability and accessibility of appetitive functional relations for both participants. This might explain also how self-compassion can emerge from being the recipient in a compassionate interaction, since appetitive contingencies are more accessible and available in such an interaction. Our proposed conceptualization of compassion from a contextual perspective is that compassion, as behavior sensitive to IBCs, can be understood in terms of how it functions for both the provider and the recipient, that is self or other. And compassionate behavior is any behavior that shifts functional relations from aversive toward appetitive, that is, it creates functionally compassionate contexts and is shaped and maintained appetitively by such shifts. And here's a QR code to snag that brief conceptualization and the 7 core components so that you can have it to refer to in the future, and also as we do some more experiential exercises coming up. All right. So, keeping in mind these components of the conceptual analysis, let's watch one of my favorite home videos together. The context here is that her uncle came to run a 5K. He left his dog, Ollie, with us, and then he went to the race. So let's watch this briefly.
Don't cry, don't cry. Don't cry, Ollie. Don't cry. Don't go to mommy. Go to mommy.
Ollie, come here. Come here. Aww.
Yes. Ollie. Go to mommy. When you go right, you don't sit. Don't cry.
Okay. So if you want to write it in the question box, or if you want to speak up, I'm wondering if you can see any components from this conceptual analysis in this interaction. So think about that for a moment. If you can notice any of those components that we talked about, and either jot that down for yourself or write in the question box or speak up. Also, what might not be present? What do you not see but maybe still be a part of it?
Hannah, would you mind just sharing the past few QR codes again? We have a couple of well, we have somebody that feels like they need a little extra time.
Sure thing. This one in particular? This is
Um,
the components and the
would you
concept?
allow them to do the first one again too, just in case?
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
sure. Okay, I'll leave this on for a little bit. And then this is the one that you'll be referring to. Is that good?
Thank you so much.
Sure. Do we have any responses in the question box yet?
Looks like just one. Sensitive to antecedents of aversive functional relations in the recipient.
Okay. Yeah, if anybody also is like, if there are any specific moments that jumped out at you, I think it's interesting that she brought her boots over to Ollie because, you know, at the time she really loved those rain boots. And it's interesting to she's assuming taking on her own perspective, thinking that he would also like the rain boots. I imagine that she's repeating some things that she heard. I'm not sure if she heard it from me because I'm not sure if I if I said things like that. But my guess is that she is, from her history of being in a compassionate exchange, that she has learned to engage in certain behaviors towards others as well. So I find that to be pretty interesting. And I see that there's an aversive present for Ollie the dog, and for her, the aversive of him whining and crying, and her attempt to. It's possible that we can't assume that her response is an attempt to create a more repetitive context. It could be that that's really painful for her to hear the crying, and she's just trying to get rid of that. But I think we would see over time if that was functioning repetitively or more aversively. Any other thoughts that anybody wants to bring up?
Alrighty, so I love that she generalizes that compassion. I love that she generalizes that compassion to more than just humans.
Hmm.
Oh, could this be related to theory of mind or perspective taking?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways of talking about these concepts, and certainly perspective taking is a really helpful, important way to engage in compassionate practices. Definitely, yeah. I think what would distinguish compassion from it is seeing over time if those appetitive functional relations are present, if it ends up being an expansive experience for her, for the dog, for, it's hard to say if it's an expansive experience for the dog, but that it's more of an approach kind of behavior than a run, fight, hide type of behavior. Yeah, great. Okay, thank you so much for participating. Also, I think just to say that animals are sometimes probably potentially much easier subjects for compassion than human beings might be. And they could also really be used for facilitating compassion for ourselves too. They provide something for human beings that is intangible. So, so now we are going to, we're going to do some guided practice, but first, poll number 8. I don't remember what I had at poll number 8, but let's see.
Alrighty, everybody. So what is your experience or interest in guided practices?
Oh, glad I asked that.
Thank you all for voting. I'll shut this down in just a second.
And by guided practice, it could mean different things for different people. Meditation, mindfulness, or I don't know, just listening to things you found on the internet. It could be all sorts of different things.
Alrighty, let's shut this down. It looks like 57% say I have some experience and find them to be useful. 30% say I have some experience, but they do not usually resonate. 8% say I'm a very experienced practitioner, and 5% say if there were an eye rolling emoji option, I'd pick it.
Okay, cool. Well, let's see how you respond to these. If it truly is aversive to you, though, if it evokes eye rolling, of course, feel free to opt out of this. Or if it evokes anything more, more aversive than that. Okay, so we're going to do 2 guided practices. This first one is Chris Fraser, who's a compassion-focused, ACT-oriented therapist, and he primarily works with children and teens. For this one, as much as you can, just try to listen, tune in, if you can, and it's okay if you can't too. And then afterwards, I'll have you jot down some notes. So let's go ahead with this one.
So, hello, I'd like to invite everyone, just take a moment and look around your room, wherever space, if you're outdoors, look around and just get a little curious. You're here on purpose. You're listening to me, wherever you may be.
Oh, sorry about that.
You may be in your home. You may be even watching this on a phone in your car, in the back seat, but just notice where you're at. And then find something that, for some reason, creates a smile. You don't even know why. It could be a gum wrapper in the carpet or something that nobody's found, and it makes you sort of go, oh, what's that? Well, that's a pretty color. Just be curious. Find something that creates just a little hint. It doesn't have to be a jolly, like, ooh, but just a little smile. Ah, there it is. And be curious. Even look up, look around. And then just take a moment. That's where you're at. It's where you are, wherever you are. This is where you are. And then allow yourself, if you're comfortable, if you're willing, let your eyes close. turn inward a little bit and just make sure that you're here. Wiggle your toes. I still have feet. Hello, feet. And then notice what your hands are touching. Thank you, my hands that have driven this car, who have just made me a yummy breakfast, or all the things they do. Just notice where your hands are. Relax your wrists. Notice your eyes. Squinch up your eyes like a little kid who says, you can't see me, before they realize, oh yeah, people can see me when my eyes are closed. And relax. Your eyes don't have to scan for anything. They don't have to look for danger, or, walking across the street, they didn't have to look out for cars. Just relax your eyes. Shoulders relax. And then take a few deep breaths, something we do all the time, but allow yourself to breathe in a little deeper and a whole lot slower than you usually do. Like, like a child blow out birthday candles. They try to get them all at once. And when you're little, there's not too many. But this long, smooth exhale. Breathe in deeply through the nose if you can. If you got stuffy nose, no worries, just breathe. Long, smooth exhale. And just feel that sensation slowing down as you exhale. And now I'm going to ask you to do something sort of silly. It's like I want you to breathe in, but I want you to smile like you farted, but nobody knows you did it yet. And mischievous, like, oh. And that long, slow exhale. Slowing down, slowing down. And I want you to use that human ability to imagine. Just imagine today when you're out and about that you hear a little sound. You hear this little sound that sort of goes, you're like, what is that? And as you look around and look for the sound, you notice that there's a little puppy. There's this little puppy that's to be under a car, or it's just hidden underneath something. That's just, oh boy, you bend down, and if it's under a car, you sort of creep down, and this little face is looking at you. And your heart goes out to this little puppy because you notice it must have been hurt, and it's just, this poor little puppy is stuck under this car, and it just won't come out. And you put your hands out, and you go, oh, it's okay. It's okay. And it starts scooching forward towards you, and then it pulls back. You put your hand out. Okay. Little puppy goes forward and just stay real still. It falls into your hand. I want you to imagine that you have this little puppy that is so shaky and scared that you have to pull it to your arm. So take your hands and imagine you got this little puppy. I don't know. I like all kinds of puppies, but I really love golden retrievers. So it's like a little golden retriever puppy, your Labradoodle, or whatever your favorite. And just imagine, hold it and just feel it. Bring your hands to your heart, to your body, and imagine. And if you're holding this puppy, it would just sort of be like shaking, and you hold it, and you feel the sense, notice a sense of compassion. This poor little thing is scared, it's shaking. And you feel this sense, like, I will care for you. Feel the warmth of this little squirmy puppy. It stops shaking and it calms down. You have this sense of great care and empathy. I will care for you, oh, you poor little thing. It looks up at you, and then it closes its eyes for the first time in a long time, feeling safe and protected. And just feel that I will care for you. That flow of compassion to this poor little injured thing. You carry this sweet little puppy home, and you raise it, and time goes by. You nurture this puppy and care for it. And it grows and it grows and it grows until something very magical and unusual happens. This puppy grows so big, it's like a huge Harry Potter dog, or Clifford the Big Red Dog, for those of you who know about Clifford. It's enormous. And there comes a day where you are hurting like that little puppy under the cross. Something's happened unexpected that has occurred that has created harm to you. And you're in need emotionally, physically, both. And out of nowhere comes this big, enormous dog that was once a puppy, and it holds you. And like all dogs know, they sense at a level that humans don't quite understand that you need care. This puppy surrounds you and puts a big paw over you. And you can feel yourself nestled into this enormous dog that is protecting you, caring for you, and it doesn't care about if you're in school, what your grades, or how much money you've had, how good of a parent you think you are, or any of the thoughts or emotions or judgments that show up in your mind. It just loves you. And it's returning the favor, and you can feel that big paw. I will protect you. I will never hurt you. Let that soak in as much as you can. Now you're receiving. This sweet little thing is returning the favor. And it's strong and loving. It knows your hurts. It will never judge you. Love you just as you are, with all your stuff. Doesn't matter if you have hair, or how much you weigh, or anything about you, or even if you stepped on his tail earlier today. Love you just as you are. And soak that in as much as possible into every cell of your body from head to toe. Feel any sense of warmth. Let it surround you with the protection of this big, big, loving dog that was once a vulnerable puppy. Now I want you to let that record into every little DNA strand as much as possible. Regardless of what showed up, just bring back a little bit of what you can. There's sometimes a mixture of the sweet and the sad, the good and the bad, judgments, but just soaking that sense of being protected and cared for and nurtured just as you are. Just as you are. Just as a dog could. Look it in. So good. And I want you to bring it all back. You may hear my dog downstairs. She's little, but she's mighty. And she would do this for me, no shame. Let's allow ourselves just to bring this back enough so in a time of need, you can bring this to yourself at any time. Bring your hands to your heart or your chest if you care to. Bring the image of this big, beautiful dog protecting and nurturing anytime. And to wake up that sense of being cared for with great, great compassion, with great love, with great care. And so in a moment, we're going to let our eyes flutter open. And just take a second to just savor any part of this. Just bring it all back and bring it all back into certain parts of you. Even yourself. Give yourself some credit because for some of us, this is really different. Regardless of what your mind says, bring back the parts that are going to be helpful and useful to you. So we're going to let our eyes flutter open. If they were closed, and if they were just open staring at me with my eyes closed, that's cool too. And see the smile smiling back at you. Noticing the room around you. Maybe now perhaps noticing the same thing that made you smile. Or something else that made you smile. Just noticing the color, the texture, what it is, what it's made out of. And thank you for taking the time to do this practice with me. Make it your own. Visit it again if you care to. And to know that we're in this together. And this is something that I do. And so if you're doing this, knowing that I'm doing it as well. Thank you.
Okay, so just take a few moments to reflect and write about your experience, anything that came up for you, whatever it is. Just take a couple moments to do that. If you want to write directly in the question box, feel free to do so, but just take a moment.
Alrighty, looks like some people are saying that dogs stress them out. Dogs are terrifying to them. This was a great moment for me. I felt very relaxed and was fighting to avoid dozing off. This technique reminds me of contemplative prayers. It was difficult in the beginning to close my eyes and focus, but later it was a little bit better.
Apologies to the person who has a fear of dogs. It certainly is interesting to see how people have such different experiences with the same topographical content. If anybody wants to speak out loud, please do so also. Okay, so the next guided practice is with Dr. Emily Sandos. And for this one, I want you to experience it as you wish. But I'd also want this time for you to be a little bit more analytical if you choose to be. If you want to pull up your, if you can, the the components and the concept that we discussed. You can jot down notes during this practice too. So look out to specifically to see if any of those components show up for you, and also any thoughts, feelings, sensations, or any ideas that come to you.
Take a moment and go ahead and let your eyes fall closed. Then breathe. Take just a few minutes as you breathe here with your eyes closed to notice what it feels like to breathe. Let air come into your body as you expand to make room. Then let air leave your body as you squeeze to exhale and empty. And breathe. And I want you to imagine as you breathe that each breath could make more and more room for your experience right now. You might imagine each inhale stretching out room in your mind for your thoughts to unfold, to bounce about. for any emotions to rise and fall and shift. And for the noticing of physical sensations. And breathe, letting that space within your awareness become broader and broader so your experience can fill in without swallowing you up. Still there, here, still now, still noticing. And breathe. And on your next breath, I'd like you to notice any memories of you moving about your world this past week that feel available. You might notice just as I say that where your mind immediately goes. And breathe, making room for that too. See if you can't really see yourself in your mind's eye. If you are watching a trailer for a movie about your life over this past week. Take a moment to try on seeing you in your body, in the spaces that you brought yourself. Notice moments of stillness and moments of movement. And breathe. Noticing the memory and any reactions to it. And breathe, noticing moments where you were alone. Moments where you were in connection. And moments maybe where you were not alone, but were not connected. And breathe. And let your breath make more and more room for those memories and your reactions to them as they flow and rise and fall. And on your next breath, I'd like you to see if you can't let rise up from the jumble of memories of you moving about your world over the past week, to see if you can't let rise up a difficult moment. Notice your reaction to those words. What rises up right away. Notice if you feel called to experience the moment in first person, like it was happening again right now, and breathe. And see if you can't bear witness. Watching yourself in a moment of pain or sorrow or tension or fear. Watching your reaction. How can you tell from the outside, from here and now, that you are hurting or running from hurt or hiding from hurt or fighting with hurt? And breathe. And see if you can, as you breathe, make more and more room for you to bear witness to yourself in a moment of struggle without that experience swallowing you up. And breathe. And I want you to imagine that as you breathe, that there was more and more room for you to bear witness in that way. Notice what your mind does here, how it gets busy or turns away. Notice what happens in your body. You have a physical, embodied reaction to this way of remembering. And breathe. And notice as you breathe if there are any feelings that you can touch as you watch this you in a moment of struggle. And breathe. Notice any reactions to that you that rise and fall as you breathe. And as you gently let that particular memory seep back into the jumble. And breathe. And on your next breath, see if you can't let rise up in the jumble of memories of you over your past week. A moment of peace or joy or contentment. Notice your reaction right away as I say that. Notice what memory your mind chooses, or if it has trouble settling in on one, and let whatever shows up be the one you'll work with. Notice if you get drawn into that memory in first person and breathe. See if you can't return to the here and now and bear witness to that you, watching them from the outside in a moment of peace or joy or contentment, and breathe. And as you breathe, let it be that your breath could make more and more room for this experience of remembering you in a moment of seeking or exploring or engaging your world. See if you can't, as you breathe, notice any thoughts that come up with this memory, what your mind does as you sit and witness and breathe. Notice as you breathe if your body reacts, if you have a physical reaction to this remembering of you in a moment of peace or joy or contentment. And breathe and notice if there is an emotion that you can touch here, right inside this memory. And breathe, letting each breath make more and more room for the experience of remembering and for any reactions you have to that memory and to yourself there. And breathe, letting each breath make more and more room for your experience to be here without swallowing you up. And notice your reactions to this memory and your reactions as it gently fades and seeps back into the jumble of your memories of your life over the past week. Notice what your mind and your heart and your body do here. And give yourself a couple of breaths, letting that week past fade from you altogether. And gently, gently, gently letting it go. Take a breath here and now to again make a bit more room for your experience. And whenever you're ready, let your eyes come open.
Okay. So, if you have not fallen asleep, or if you have, try to gently wake yourself up and take a few moments to jot down some reflections. And specifically, if you can, think about the conceptualization and the core components that we discussed. See if you found some components in the practice. Be related to words that you heard, tone, thoughts, feelings, or sensations in your body. Just write down on a piece of paper, or if you want to write directly in the chat, you can. Another minute. And if you're writing on a paper, if you can write in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and speak out loud, now is a good time to do that.
Morgan, a couple of questions. Can you tell us more about the way you interpret the components in this practice?
Can you specify what do you mean the way I?
Yeah, it looks like there's another part from this person.
Okay.
For me, it was a calming experience, but when I zoomed out to look at the components of compassion, it was hard for me to link them at the video.
Yeah. Totally understandable. And you might not be able to link all of them. I'm curious if anybody was able to link any of them, and then I can go into a little bit more. I can go into that further. If anybody does have anything that connected with them. Are there any comments any other comments?
Yeah, tone of voice was non-threatening, so I felt at ease, and that is huge for me.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just a couple like that.
So I'll just go with that comment. Feeling at ease. So that, I would correlate that with repetitive functional relations. And I know it's for both Chris and Emily, they really sort of do a lot of front loading of that, creating that safe environment, that safe context, and having the listener in a context that is primarily appetitive. And it's really interesting if you want to learn more about compassion focused therapy or compassionate mind training. That is something that is emphasized there, and it seems to really overlap with a lot of ways that practitioners might do this work too. Anything else? Did anybody notice any aversives?
Alrighty, sorry, I'm just reading them as we go.
Yeah, whatever you can read out loud.
This one was harder for me, experimentally for me. Her voice evoked memories of church, so for this one, the shift from aversive to appetitive functions appetitively for the provider of compassion.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, were those two different comments? Did one person say?
That was one big paragraph.
Okay, so I'm not sure if they were saying that reminding them as church was created a more repetitive experience context, or if that was an aversive. I wasn't sure about that, which could function completely differently for different people. But it sounded like there was some shift from aversive to appetitive there. And was it that the words that you were hearing, there was a thought, something about a compassion provider and a compassion recipient, and I was interested in that. Can you read that comment one more time?
Oh, I don't have the comment anymore.
Okay.
But
That's
I
okay.
can read one if you want to move on.
I'd love to hear more if anybody else has any, anybody else has anything about any appetitives that they were aware of, aversives, if there was an understanding, and we could talk about, you could talk about either one at this point. Where's
Yeah,
there?
there's more thoughts. This just stressed me out. I'm finding the repetitive phrases makes me feel stuck. I'm finding out I am a one and done sort of person. Maybe it's the ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, certainly putting these two together was an ask for you to be able to focus for that long. So that totally makes sense. And that's okay. And for some people, these practices might be better if they're just short clips. Even if, if you could, these are just samples, and there's lots of resources out there if this is appealing to you in any way, or if it evokes something that you're interested in or elicits something. And it can be a 40-minute practice, it could be a 2-minute practice, or it could be maybe that you find some imagery or some sounds that help create an appetitive context for yourself. I guess what I wanted to demonstrate here is that tone and words and imagery can facilitate different contexts, and that topographically they might be different but function similarly. They also might be topographically the same, but function differently for different people at different times, depending on their context. And certainly, there are many, many ways to contact these appetitive functional relations. Here, so here, for both of them, I see that there's a pattern that they create this kind of safe, appetitive environment, and then throw in some aversives. And I think this also relates to sometimes the way clinical behavior analysis is done too, to create this container, and then we return to some of those aversives and try to change the function of them within this kind of practice. But of course, these are not individualized. These are really practices that aren't taking you personally into account. And if you can, be in a situation with a provider who can really curate this sort of work, that is ideal. Any other comments that anybody else that we should look at?
I think that's it for now.
Okay, great. And I also want to emphasize that depending on your history, depending on your cultural background, these things can affect you differently, of course, and they might look different, whatever works for you. I know if you get the kind of eye roll response to guided practices, that may not be for you, but maybe something in the form of music or art or dance or running or boxing or can create similar context for you. And I'm hoping that these practices just sort of prime people who are not used to thinking about, especially, it's common in the ABA world sometimes not to tune as much into our feelings, thoughts, and sensations. So this is just one way to tune into that a little bit more. And I hope that it gave you a little bit more of that discrimination training between aversives and appetitives, so that we can start seeing that in our world. Start noticing more what aversives are present, and hopefully, if we can create expanse around that we can approach those aversives and transform them into appetitives. These are just 2 books. Again, these practices will be different for everybody, and but I find these books to be helpful from a CFT slant and an ACT slant, ways in which we can learn to tune into our thoughts, feelings, and sensations. I found these books to be useful, and they are chock full of guided practices and the theories behind them. And I think they could certainly be applicable to many relationships, including those within an ABA setting, a behavior analyst, technician, a client. So now that we have potentially come in contact with a compassionate context, maybe even just a little bit, with the aversives, the appetitives, the shifts, the antecedents, the consequences, behavioral contingencies, I'd like us to think a little bit about action implications in behavior analytic settings. I imagine that for the clinical behavior analyst, maybe this is less of a stretch, but for those in the ABA settings, this could be a bit of a leap. But I want you to take a moment to think about what some action implications might be for your work. So I do see guided practices in any form that works for you as an action implication itself, a potentially really powerful one. I hope that you have a somewhat of a sense that engaging in self-compassion is also an act of compassion towards others, and that you can practice these skills. Any thoughts about that? How we could either bring these practices into our work, or if you just thinking about the conceptual analysis and aversives, appetives, how you might bring this into your work. Feel free, please write in the questions box or speak out loud if you feel comfortable. I'd love to hear some voices if you are willing. And if you're not, that's okay too. Is anything showing up, Marissa?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay.
Just one. So far, let's see. It's a good reminder that we should center ourselves before working with clients so that we do not bring negatives into sessions.
Yeah, I think it's something that we probably do need to remind ourselves a lot. It's hard to remember. It's hard to remember to do that. But as we create a context for others, considering our own context is important. Any practices that you already engage in that might come to mind? Anything that you do, or any practices that you engage in that emphasize appetitive functional relations over aversive functional relations?
Let's see. We'll bring in compassion towards the clients we support.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if this falls in line with this theory, but we use deep breathing as a way of teaching self-calming regularly with our clients who have meltdowns.
Sure. Breathing is a great, can be a great technique for helping people shift their context from aversive toward appetitive. Yeah. For some, it might trigger, if they have had experience with breathing, it could, in a negative way, it could possibly create more aversiveness. But if we practice those sorts of skills outside of the situation too, then we can really use it when we need it. Okay, since it's a mixed group of ABA and clinical behavior analysts, I will not get into the weeds too much with action implications. But I think that we can think about how practices, that there are likely aversives present that you may or may not be aware of in your work environment. And I hope that what you can bring with you is be able to tune into those a little bit more and consider how we might be able to stretch that context out a little bit. Maybe we can change up a practice. If we're using certain protocols, is that fostering certain rigidity? Is that fostering some aversiveness in the context? How can we modify those things to create more appetitive functional relations? Can we add appetitives to the environment to create more flexibility? Can we zoom out a bit to consider how we might contact a variety of reinforcers? Maybe there's some discrimination trainings that we can engage in that would be building blocks for compassionate behavior towards others. Just the act of tuning into our own thoughts and sensations and feelings could be foreign for some, but helpful when we're considering how our experience, our context is so interrelated with those around us. Okay. I think one of the best ways, most efficient ways, and simplest ways that we can promote teaching, that we can promote compassion as a teaching tool is to engage in compassion towards ourselves and others. So if we are engaging in compassion towards others, what might be happening that will create a generative quality for compassion overall? Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
It looks like, is it possible to show the picture of the two books again? But also, sorry that was the one that I chose at that moment. It might be helpful to train direct support staff to practice self-compassion. This will allow them to engage more effectively with adult clients. We engage in client-led therapy. We allow the client to lead the session. That way it is reinforcing for them and promotes an environment that is conducive to learning through happiness.
Yeah, the idea of having the clients lead the session is really interesting, and it reminds me also of some applied behavior analytic practices, one of which allows clients to leave whenever they want to. So there's no aversive structure in place that is creating a necessity to do whatever the practitioner wants them to do. The compliance is not as stringent, and I think that there are lots of ways we can incorporate that freedom in there that communicate an appetitive context. Yeah. Anything else?
All right. Engaging in perspective taking more often from various sources.
Sure.
That's about it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read this quote from, I think it's Dennis Tersch. Actually, I have the book right here. Yep, Dennis Tersch on overcoming, a compassionate guide to overcoming anxiety. As you begin to function in more compassionate ways, perhaps even to extend your heart and hands towards others, your mind will become more sensitive to both your own and others' emotions. You will become better able to notice and discern the quality of your own anxiety and the anxiety of those around you, without this anxiety feeling as if it may be a catastrophe in and of itself. When you're intimately in contact with your own experience, moment by moment, you may be willing to experience life just as it is, as it presents itself, which may include the experience.